Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Music Masterclass for today. I'm happy to see people checking in as always, and I'm stalling for a moment while I do my little sound check. I'm on delay, of course. I want to make sure that everything's cool. Checking on my phone. But what I've got for you here is I made myself a nice little uh, what's the word? A promo, a little opening video that's going to be like the opening for the show. And oh, there we go. Now I'm live. Okay, excellent. I'm going to play this for you. And I've mentioned that I wrote some music, and I'm going to talk about the music that goes for it. It's a little theme that's. Hello, my name is Marc Sabatella, director of the Mastering MuseScore School. Welcome to the Music Master Class. Each week in this free series, I share my musical insights and show you what I'm working on. And we check out some of your submissions too. We talk about composition, arranging, harmony, counterpoint, and more. Whether you're into classical music, jazz, pop, or other genres, I try to provide ideas everyone can use, and I encourage all of you to give each other feedback and support. So, let's make some music. So there you have it. Yeah, I'm not really a video producer. I'm a musician who makes some videos occasionally. Anyhow, hope you enjoyed that little spot there. Hope I didn't tell any lies. Hopefully, I captured something about what you feel like the experience of this class actually is. Um, so, uh, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about that music that I wrote for this and talk about what my goals were in creating it and how I kind of decided to achieve those goals. And then we'll go on and look at some of the music that was submitted. And William Halstead, if you are here, did I see you check in? I don't know. I'm curious to know if you want to be if you I want to address some some of the comments that were posted about your fugue, um, but I might want to address that a little bit, and then give you time to keep working on it and see what else you might want to come up with. So anyhow, so too quiet. All right, that's good to know. I was playing the video from YouTube, which I would have thought would have just done the share. Okay, so anyhow, I'm going to play the music now from within MuseScore, and this should be a more normal volume level here. And so I started. Well, let me tell you some of the things that I'm going for here. So yeah, William, I feel free to let me know what you're comfortable talking about, me talking about, and so forth, and we'll go from there. Because yeah, I definitely would like to address some of what was discussed. Um, so what I was going for in this piece was the MuseScore Cafe piece that I wrote was a sort of a fun, jazzy, background music-y kind of piece, and it was suggested for this, and I agree that it should be something more classical in nature, if for no other reason than well, no one, whoever suggested it, I don't remember, didn't give a reason, but to me, it captures more of the composition aspect, since so much about jazz is improvised and so forth. A lot of what we're doing here works about composition. And yeah, sometimes I'm dealing with jazz, but the as soon as we talk about composition and to have a little broader applicability, I felt it should be something in a more classical genre. And yeah, I didn't want it to feel like, oh, well, we're only dealing with older music, right? So I wanted to have something somewhat modern feeling about it, or broader, maybe not modern exactly. And yeah, so I wanted, because my brain has been so much on the subject of counterpoint, I wanted it to have some counterpoint in it. And I guess those are the things that I had going for. So let me play through just the music again so you can hear it without me talking. And uh, and then I'll talk about what's going on in it. Okay, so that time you could hear the music a little better and see what was happening. Um, so the opening was not what I wrote first. What really the first thing that I wrote was this little chunk of melody, that little bit. And I'll tell you why I wrote that little chunk of melody. I wrote that chunk of melody because I had it in my mind to directly reference this. I wanted to reference da da doo doo da, but make it take the idea behind this line and transform it. So I didn't want to like take that exact line because that exact line is so much about the jazz language. I didn't want to take that exact line, but I wanted to take something about it. So what we have here is scale degree 5 in the key of B flat, and then this kind of flatted 6th scale degree and a root up here. That's when I say I took the idea. Oh, and this little E natural also. So it's like this enclosure around the F, right? I have scale degree 5. I'm up a half step. I'm down a half step. And I have a root, which I think I mentioned originally. That was actually the top note of the voicing. Then I changed it. So in this theme, it's also in A minor. I wrote it first in B flat minor because I was directly coming from the MuseScore Cafe theme. But then as I was writing it in that key, I really thought about my experience writing for string quartet and having it played by real musicians and all the grumbling and all the feedback I got that B flat minor or keys with that many flats are not fun for string players. And it's not like that would prevent me from ever doing it, but then I also checked the ranges of some of the things and realized that moving it to A minor made me just as happy. So that's what I did. I moved it to A minor. So, but again, I have scale degree 5 in A minor, and then the half step below and the half step below above. So I have, and then I target the root. So this little figure is really quite related to my cafe figure. That was where I started from. Now, I also had to realize that in order to make that line work, I do this harmonic minor thing here, right? E, F, G sharp, A. That's that tail end of harmonic minor. And that's one of the things they tell you, well, you don't do that because it's going to make the music sound kind of a particular kind of Middle Eastern kind of vibe. But I'm okay with that. I was fine with that. I was fine having this sort of ethnic quality to the music. That was one of the things, one of the conscious choices I made in deciding I want it to be a little more universal, not just feel like I'm writing a Baroque piece or a classical piece. The other thing I wanted was, well, if I'm going to have that little thing going on, I also knew, I don't know, somehow I knew instinctively I wanted it to start with something that felt more stately, and frankly, I wanted to rip off Beethoven. That's the thing. So this really really Kyrie. Okay, I have to check that out because I'm not thinking about how that relates, but I'm sure it does. The opening here. If someone can tell me what Beethoven piece I ripped this off from, I would love it. But I'm quite sure there is one. But I swear I listened to the beginnings of every movement of every symphony and every string quartet, and it wasn't any of them. There's aspects of it that are Beethoven-esque, and maybe it's not Beethoven. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm ripping off Mozart. But this whole opening, that I feel like it's ripped off in a good way. I'm not opposed to ripping things off and to borrowing. Um, so I think what I was originally thinking was, so what I have here is 5 to 1 at the beginning, right? This is 5 1, and I have that 5 chord in first inversion. What I really think is the thing that I hear in my head, the Beethoven that I'm hearing, is not in first inversion with the third in the bass. It's actually in third inversion. It has the seventh in the bass. So I really think the Beethoven piece that I'm referencing is more like this. More like that is a D, and this is the G sharp. And then this probably goes to a C. So something like this. That's what I think actually is the piece that I'm referencing. So Brahms Symphony 4? Ah, wow, okay. Thank you. I'm going to check it out and see how close I came, because I didn't obviously check it out because I wasn't knowing what I was thinking. But that's great to know that at least two people heard that, because I know I'm hearing something. So what I have here is an ascending line here, right? This is scale degree 2 going to 3, and then it's going up chromatically. And this C sharp, this chord right here is basically, we're in the key of A minor. This chord is basically an A7 chord. I have A is my root here in the viola, and if you don't read alto clef very well, join the club. But take my word for it, that's an A. I've probably pointed out that I cheat, right? When I write, I say, no, I don't want to read this. I change, oops, not that clef, this clef. I change to treble clef transpose so I can read it a little better. That's just me. But no, I wanna train myself a little better in alto clef. Sorry, my light just went off. Come back. All right, there we go. So this is a secondary dominant. This is an A dominant 7th chord. This one is in 3rd inversion. So this is A, it's the 1 chord, dominant 7th, going to the 4 chord. So this is a secondary dominant. So people who have either taken my harmony course or have studied harmony on your own, when you hear talk about secondary dominants, that's what this is. That's where this accidental comes from. This A7 would be the 5 chord in the key of D minor. We're not really in the key of D minor, but we're creating the illusion of 5, 1 in D minor. But we're not in D minor, we're really in A minor. This next chromaticism that happens is, y'all know what this is called? Oh yeah, the Lacrimosa, definitely. Yeah, so if that's the part you mean, sonically I hear the connection. I'll have to listen and see if I'm like using specific lines too. But yeah, no, that piece is definitely one that is burned a little in my head that I could easily have been subconsciously referencing. So anyhow, this chord, this is that same exact chord. Like, look at it note for note. We have we have F in the bass. I know how to read bass clef. We have bass, we have F in the bass. We have A, we have D, which is the root of the chord here, and then we have D there also. So this is our D minor triad with the D doubled. Then this is that same chord. This time I'm doubling the F, but that D goes up to D sharp. This from F to D sharp is called an augmented 6th chord. Jazz people might recognize it as the sound of what's called a tritone substitution, and I go on and on about that in my course, and I've talked about that, so I'm not going to talk too much about harmony here, but I just want to point out that this is basically where that sound of the augmented 6th chord comes from, and it's exactly this progression. It's that minor 4 getting to 5, but doing it by way of this chromatic passing tone. So that sound is so much a part of this classical language, and that's what I'm guessing that maybe the Brahms has in it also, because it's so much a part of that language. So I made a conscious effort that I wanted to use that sound as part of this whole dramatic opening. I knew I wanted that augmented 6th chord in there, so that's what I got. Now, when it comes to the actual melody here, I'm going to mute the middle 2 voices for a second. So we just hear the melody, top voice, and the cello. What did I do? I did the wrong thing, obviously. I soloed instead of muted, right? That's exactly what I did. Don't solo these, mute those. That's what I meant. Okay, now let's try it. So this piece is based on this top voice melody, right? It's not, so I used counterpoint in this, and I just took out all the places where you would have heard that counterpoint in the middle voices, so that you can really tell that the piece is really led by the top voice. The top voice is the strongest voice kind of throughout. So that makes it unlike a lot of the classic contrapuntal forms like fugues, where really it is more of an equal sharing of who's really carrying the lead. So here, no, this is a bit more of a traditional thing where really the melody is on top at all times. Um, and the bottom voice here, so here's another thing. I knew I wanted it to be rhythmic. I wanted it to have some rhythmic interest and a flow. So this cello part, in fact, if I just focus on just the cello, um, that part is, I don't know, vaguely tango-esque, right? I don't know if anyone hears tango in that. I kind of a little bit do. This month, by the way, marks Astor Piazzolla's 100th birthday. So not that I knew that when I was writing this line, but part of what made me hear something vaguely tango-esque, frankly, is the fact that when I work, like I'm a pianist, and I've done a few concerts with a string quartet that I assembled and arranged a whole bunch of music for string quartet and piano. And the cellist in that group plays in tango bands, and that's kind of where I knew of him. Well, I knew of him from a number of things, but I knew of him as someone with an interest in tango. So this idea that there's going to be these sort of syncopated bass lines that a cello can carry, yeah, this isn't necessarily a specifically tango bass line, but it's tango-esque. That's all I can say, tango-esque. But now let me unmute these guys here, and I'm going to take the cello out now, and now we're going to hear the actual counterpoint. So it's a 5-measure melody. Oops, I should have, well, I'll just sing it with it, right? So it's a 5-measure melody. I didn't set out to write a 5-measure melody. I wrote this because I wanted the stretto. The stretto is the fact that the second voice enters immediately, like after just a measure. And in this case, it's entering a fifth below. So it's entering at the 4, we might say. It's at scale degree. It's, well, not scale degree 4, but it's basically pitched a fourth above. Everything about this is a literal translation of the original, a fourth above, and then down an octave. So fugues typically are at the 5. It's all transposed kind of up a fifth and maybe down an octave. This is up a fourth and down an octave. So it's not really doing the typical fugue thing. And a fugue wouldn't start off with the accompaniment like this, and it wouldn't start off with a stretto. So I'm using devices that come from that world, but I'm not writing a fugue. I'm just using some of these techniques. So bum bum boodum bum boo bum boo doo 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 doo. This is an exact translation of the original down a fourth, except for a couple little tonal adjustments. Like this should have been what did I do? I forget what I did, but all I can tell you is that, boy, if I look at this, that's a major third. I look at this, it's a minor third. This should have been a B flat, is what's going on. If I was to really keep the shape of this should have been bum down a whole step, and then boo bum bum bum. Should have been a B flat if I were to keep the original shape. But I didn't. I wanted a G7. So here's another thing where I'm writing knowing that I'm not writing a fugue and letting it take it where it wants to take me, but I'm trying to fit into a form. I wanted this to feel like it fit a more typical AABA kind of song type of form. And so I say that this phrase is 5 bars long, which it is, but the entrance of the viola, the third voice, after only 4 bars there. So I had 4 bars, then this voice enters. You can kind of hear the entrance of the viola feels like it's starting the next phrase, even though the violin doesn't start its next phrase until another measure. Let's hear that. Oh, let's hear that with, now let's just hear it without the, it's kind of fun hearing it without the cello for now. So let me hear it without the cello. 1. So when that came in, that was, that was as if we were starting a new 4-bar phrase. I also took some care to not always have these things the same place harmonically. Like, think about the first entrance here. Well, let me bring the cello back in. When I bring the cello back in here, the first entrance, the chords here is 5 to 1. I'm in A minor, and I'm basically 5, 1. The second entrance is, this is not a dominant 7th chord. It's a minor chord. Well, you don't even hear the third, so maybe it is a dominant 7th chord. I don't know. It's not yet, though. We haven't heard the C sharp yet, though. So here I'm bringing it in on more of a minor tonality, and then only at the very end bringing in this major tonality. But the next entrance comes in on a major chord, and then it reaches the minor here. So I'm actually going out of my way to make sure when this theme comes in that it's not in the same harmonic context every time. And Dave, I'll get to your question in a second here. This to me was also important because if you think back, those of you who have followed the MuseScore Cafe might remember it was just about a year ago, because it was this time of year. We did a project I called the Corona Canon. You might remember that, where we basically collectively wrote a canon. I had everyone write 4 measures of melody over a very specific chord progression. And the idea is, if you keep repeating that chord progression over and over again, then you can put whatever melody on top of it you want, and at some level it works. No, it doesn't really work that well. I had to do a lot of picking and choosing which lines I used together based on what they did voice leading wise. And even then I allowed some doublings and dissonances that I wouldn't have allowed otherwise, because I was working with other people's melodies. But the point is, by repeating the same chord progression over and over again, that was at least possible. And that is the model of the Pachelbel canon that's so famous, right? It's an 8-measure progression. Well, it depends on what time signature you write it in, but it's a chord progression that is of a fixed length that keeps repeating. And then the melody that's used for one version, the first chorus, is then moves to another voice in the next chorus, and then another voice gets added, and so on. So I didn't want to do that here. I didn't want that. I wanted this asymmetry. I wanted these entrances to not be regularly every 4 bars. So even though this one happens to be after 4 bars in the viola, the next melodic statement in the violin comes after 5 bars. So there's this sort of offsetting that happens. And so I didn't want to keep the same chord progression. So I made a point of making the chord progression be a little different every time. So even though you can break it down into 4-bar phrases, none of them are the same in any way. That was important to me. So do I copy and, oh yeah. So for a simple case like this, I just re-entered the notes. I just typed in the notes in the new key. I don't think I actually copied them and then transposed them. But if it was a longer phrase, yeah, I totally would have done that. I totally would have done copy and paste. In fact, I think I did that for the viola part. I think I did copy and paste the violin part and then paste it into the viola and to go down an octave. To be honest, I don't remember exactly. But because I am kind of working a little more one measure at a time here. But that's it. It's as if I copied and pasted. Whether or not I literally did or not is kind of beside the point. So a couple other things to point out here. This melody that the violin now brings in is a 4-measure melody. So I've now kind of straightened out, and I'm kind of on a 4-measure cycle from here on out a little bit more. Not totally, but a little bit more. This melody, is sort of related to my original theme. I don't know, it feels somehow similar. It feels related. But this isn't what that melody started. This melody started simpler. It started boo-ba-da. Let me think. Ba-ba-da, da-da-da-dum, boo-ba-dum, ba-ba-da-dum. That was literally this same thing, then here, up a step. Let me think. Well, I don't know if I can actually, it was like this. So let me play it this way. So it was okay, but it was a little too boring for me. It was too repetitive. Boo-ba-dum, and this was bum, bum, bum. It was more like that, right? So let me play it one more time. It was a little too repetitive. So I played around with this phrase a bunch, and I ended up with this little thing, which again, I directly took from the cafe. Right? This chromatic enclosure of a note that I actually wanted, I brought in here. This chromatic enclosure of the E. So I use, in fact, I think it's actually even more related to this line here. It's a little closer to that line. But anyhow, it's that same idea of this chromatically enclosing the note that I'm actually targeting, which is the E. So is G the same as F double sharp? Yes, it is. So one question is, did I actually write an F double sharp somewhere? Oh, well, I think I did while I was transposing things. It might have showed one. So yeah, F double sharp would happen if I was writing in the key of G sharp minor. If I was writing in the key of G sharp minor, the leading tone would be F double sharp, and I'd want to write it that way. So now there's also a question about no phrasing. Yes, this is deliberate, and I'll tell you why. I am not a string player. I know how to write phrasing marks for wind instruments because I have experience playing wind instruments. I have a good sense of how long you want to breathe. I have a good sense for when it feels right to tongue versus slur. I don't have a good I don't have a good sense of that as a string player because I'm not a string player. So I know how to write them in, to write in the slurs, to write in the up bows and down bows, but I feel like string players would laugh at me if if I gave it to them and they tried to play it. They go, no, no, this doesn't make any sense, and they would just erase mine and write in their own. I say this because that's what's happened. Um, um, it's happened, maybe not literally laughing at me, but I've definitely gotten the feedback both from string players and from my orchestration teachers that say, you know what, if you don't really know stringed instruments, you're often better off not writing in the phrasings and letting them figure it out. And like in an orchestral context, that's very common. A lot of orchestra music doesn't have bowings written in, and it will be up to the section leader to write in bowings and then share them with everyone else so that everyone is bowing the same way. That's like a typical thing that actually happens in that world. So, yeah, bar 16, I'll talk about what happens there in a minute. So, at least I think I know what you mean with bar 16. So, yeah, this is all kind of classical language, but that kind of rhythm, that sort of tango-esque rhythm in the cello, this sort of vaguely Middle Eastern, this E, F, G sharp, A is Hava, Nagila, Hava, right? That's like this really typical music of that region of the world type of scale that has that augmented second in it, whether it's traditional Israeli music, whether it's Turkish music, Indian music, a lot of music of kind of that whole region of the world exploits that particular relationship. A half step, an augmented second, and a half step. A lot of the scales used in that music do that. So in any case, I'm doing some things here, and again, I've got more entrances. Bum ba da 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 dum. Here you get again C D D D D D. You get that a partial entrance at least. Actually, ba ba da do ba bum, and it should have gone ba ba da da ba bum, and then down a step, But here I didn't have time for that. I'm now trying to fit my harmonic mold. That is another example. This D sharp here is another one of these kind of augmented sixth chord types of sounds happening. It's not the same exact sound, not the same voicing, but it's a similar concept. I will say that. Now it's using a little more of the jazz version of the language, because I would claim B is the root of this chord, and this is really a B7 with an F in it. Anyhow, that's some harmonic stuff, and I'm not going to get any deeper into that. Oh, actually, you said 26. That's not even the one that I would have thought. Oh, it's this. It's the melodic language, right? That's the jazzism for sure. And then going on, having all the voices. I've had all that counterpoint going. And one of the purposes of that counterpoint, by the way, is to distribute the rhythmic flow. And we look at some fugues a bit later here, you'll see that that's like a thing. Especially in like Bach fugues, you will expect that even if your main theme is a mixture of eighth notes and sixteenths and quarters and rests and halves and whatever else, the main subject might be that. But once you start layering in the other voices, you usually go out of your way so that when one voice has a long note or a rest, another voice is moving, so that the motion is sort of distributed among all your voices. I wanted that. When you heard me play this with the middle voices muted, you got a sense of pulse because of the cello. The cello has this fairly steady pulse. Well, very steady. Boom, bump, ba-da-dum, bump, ba-da-dum, bump, ba-da-dum, bump, going throughout. So I could have just done boring things like let the violin and viola just go chunk, 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 chunk. I could have just given them quarter note voicings here, not had all this counterpoint, but I wanted counterpoint. So I've had all this counterpoint. I've had all this flow of eighth notes and sixteenths. Then that is the one point in the entire piece since the beginning where all the voices come back together. Eighth, eighth, and then a rest. That's like a little point of rhythmic drama there. And again, it's referencing tango-ish type Latin American rhythms in general. I'm not a tango expert. I do know actually a lot about Afro-Cuban rhythms and some of the other musics of Central and South America. But I'm not like a scholar on any specific style in there. I just play in a lot of Latin types of ensembles. So this do-dum and having the voices all come together rhythmically with a syncopation there, this is paying some more homage to this sort of Latin feel that I have. And now I have a whole new little melodic phrase that really doesn't relate to anything else. And again, I'm passing it around contrapuntally. Right? So this and even the cello, for the first time and only time in the entire piece, gets involved with the 16th notes. Just with that little run. I didn't really want to give them a whole da-da-da-da. It didn't work for me. I tried it, didn't work. But just giving them even those 3/16ths, I felt did work. And here, again, there's a final entrance of our main theme right here. Ba, boo, ba, bum, bum, ba, do, da, da, dum. Right? That was our original subject. And then I do that whole exact sequence that we heard at the beginning. 4 minor, and then that augmented sixth chord, and then a 5 chord, which is really not a 5 chord yet. It's a 1 chord in second inversion, but that gets used as a preparation for the 5 chord a lot. I'll do another one of these where I talk more about that. But so anyhow, that's what's going on there. But also I wanted to point out one other thing, and that's I used augmentation here. Listen to the cello here. Actually, check out, you'll hear the cello starting with the 16ths, and that'll make it easier to follow. So we have the boo-da-da-doo, bum, 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 bum. that is the original subject, but with the note values doubled. It's called augmentation, and that's just one of these things you do when you're writing contrapuntally. It's just a fun little trick. So the ending is exactly like the beginning, except I've taken the upper voices up an octave. I might have adjusted a couple voicings in there too, but for the most part, it's just the upper voices here moved up an octave, and I'm letting them all then have the grace notes, and the cello gets to keep his rhythm going, except without the 16ths, because I felt like that was too much. So it's the exact same as the beginning. Which kind of ties it all up in a nice bow. By the way, if you're looking at this and wondering what's going on, the two E's, I wanted these double stops here, and so I have a C and an A here. I have a C, I have an A and a C here, and I have an A here. I don't have any E's in my chord, so I wanted someone to have the E. Fourths and fifths are not great double stops on stringed instruments, so I didn't want to have anyone play A and E together. You can do it, they're harder to tune. So, unless it's two open strings, and I suppose if I had figured that out right, I would have made that happen. But I think I was still in B flat when I wrote this, and I was more worried. So what I did is these guys both have a C and an A. So I've got a lot of C and a lot of A, and the bass has got the A also. I have no E. So the second violin gets to play two E's. Well, he gets to do it twice. He gets to play one E. Actually, if you think about the tuning of a violin, it's a G string, a D string, an A string, and an E string. So he can play one E open on his E string, or her. The other E can be played on the A string. You can play that, very easily because you only actually need one finger. It's the easiest kind of double stop to play because it only requires one finger on the fingerboard. You use, bow across both notes, but that is a particularly easy type of double stop. It might be a little hard to tune, but not that bad. So that's what this is. When you see these two notes on one stem, it's saying, oh, play the same note on two different strings. And it worked out nicely that it was a note that was open, which is one of the things that I gained by moving this to A minor. So, why is G minor the relative of B flat major? Well, in general, anytime you have a major scale, you can create other scales starting anywhere, like B flat major is B flat major. If you start on C, you have what's called a Dorian scale. If you start on D, you have what's called a Phrygian scale. If you start on what's called on E flat, you have what's called a Lydian scale. Start on F, you have what's called a Mixolydian scale. Start on G, you have what's called an Aeolian scale, and that's what the relative minor is. So that doesn't answer the question because there is no answer. It's just the name we give for that relationship. Whatever key you're in, whatever major key you have, if you start on the sixth step of that major scale and then create a scale there, we call that minor, and we call it the relative minor because it uses the same notes. So if we start on C major, which is the relative major here, C major, start on the sixth note, A, the scale that you get starting on A, but using all the same notes as C major, all the white keys on the piano, starting on A, that's called A minor. So we call A minor the relative minor of C major because it's the minor scale that uses the same notes. It just starts on a different note. So same with B flat to G. So the relative minor is always the minor scale you get when you start on the sixth note of a major scale. Okay, so it's interesting that the frame of reference someone has for the ending is Schubert because the beginning, someone says, is Brahms, and I definitely will be checking that out. But yeah, this is classical cliche stuff here. It's stuff that's out there. I'm not making new stuff up. So anyhow, I want to kind of walk you through that for a couple of reasons. One, just because it's fun for me to talk about some of the stuff that I'm working on. That's one of the things that works well. Prometheus Overture. Oh, I missed that one. Okay, well, definitely I wasn't thinking AC/DC. Okay, so this idea that I'm using contrapuntal techniques and some things that are used in fugues, like that stretto, that overlapping at the very beginning, which I didn't talk about a whole lot, but the fact that the second violin enters right away. I didn't let that first statement finish before the second violin comes in. I didn't. The fact is, I only wrote one measure, and then I copied it down here and harmonized it. I didn't write four measures and then start to see, hey, what happens if I paste it in there? No, I wrote this top line. I basically wrote a measure, copied it down, harmonized it, copied it down, harmonized it, copied it down, harmonized. I went one measure at a time in writing this opening. So these are techniques that you can use. It doesn't define a fugue, but fugue uses these same techniques. So there was a whole discussion going on of a piece that William Halstead wrote, and I'm going to let you keep working on that because you did indicate you want to finish that exposition. But what I would say is I'm going to open the piece up because I have it here, and then we'll talk about it more next time. But I had talked about it a little bit before, and we talked about the things that could be done to flesh it out. And I think there's still some stuff. So he posted this and got some feedback on MuseScore.com. That was I will use the word harsh. I think that's a good bit of feedback there. So I think what I'm going to do, yeah, I definitely want to go over it, but I still want to give you an opportunity to try to finish this thing up. But I am going to summarize some of the comments, and then I'm going to go on and talk about Sam's in a little more detail. So that opening theme is the letters, or is it just that much, or is it the whole four bars? That opening subject there was created by taking his name and translating each letter of the alphabet to a particular note using a particular system that was proposed by someone else, as I recall. And so that's where this theme comes from. And you end up with a theme that's not the kind of theme that someone normally would have chosen for a fugue, certainly not if one was writing a fugue in a Baroque style. And some of the comments that were coming in were like, well, therefore it makes it not a valid fugue. I claim that that's way too strong. I would claim that just because a fugue doesn't use Baroque language harmonically or melodically doesn't mean anything. You could have a totally atonal fugue if you wanted. If you have a complete, if you follow the form of the fugue correctly according to what that form means. There's not even a one set in stone definition, but the basic idea is sound of fairly common. I mean, there's a basic idea of what constitutes a fugue. So what I would say is we have an exposition here for the most part. We have a statement of our subject. Okay, that was the name there. I guess that's William, because I'm guessing that that's the double L. WILL A, right? Oh no, wait a minute. IA. That's okay. So I'm not even sure how it relates. So or is that your last name? I don't even remember. You might have to re-explain it to me. But in any case, we have our subject here. Then we have that subject again. And the observation that was made, and yeah, it's an absolute true observation. If this was going to be a fugue, I would have expected that second statement to be in another instrument, either the cello or the viola. Order doesn't matter, but we need to see all three of them so that each instrument states it. So if this melody, if these two voices were reversed, then we would have a perfectly legitimate opening for a fugue. You have your subject, then you'd have your answer to it that's accompanied. Now, the other observation was made as well. The answer here is actually in the same key, starting on B and then starting on B again. Okay, that's not common, that's not normal, it's not usual, but does it make it not a fugue? I claim no. I claim that there's all sorts of examples of fugues in which the second entrance is not up a fifth or down a fourth. It's where some other place that they thought made sense. So whatever. The whole convention of saying, oh, that second entrance should be a fifth above. The reason is because that way it can suggest a 5 chord which wants to come back to 1, and it gives you that tonic dominant relationship. Well, if you're not writing music that's specifically triadic, then why should a fifth be such a big deal? It's not. It's only a big deal if you're trying to create a 5-to-1 type of harmonic language, and I don't think that's relevant here. So to me, that's yeah, just not really that relevant. So you come in at whatever pitch level you want and still call it a fugue as far as I'm concerned. So then he's got a couple measures of bridge material to get us back to a place where we're ready to hear a third entrance. So here's the end of that subject. Here's just some new interesting material, bridge material. Now here's cello has the third statement. And in this case, it's like a sixth down. Again, not really a common thing, but who cares? I don't care. So that is a really nice third statement of the theme in a different key. I like it. Now, we could ask, well, what happened to your counter subject? So this little melody here is the counter subject, the thing that was used as counterpoint to the initial. So we have our initial subject here. Then we have what's called our answer here. This melody, that melody there in the viola is what's called a counter subject. It's the melody that is introduced as accompaniment to the answer. It's nice to be able to reuse that counter subject, and in fact that happens here. Right? So he's doing that. So that to me is totally legitimate fugue stuff. That then completes the third statement of that subject. It ended with that half step there. That little eighth to dotted quarter half step. That is the end of the third subject. At that point, you're done with the exposition. By definition, an exposition, that's what it is. It's 3 complete statements of the thing. So you're done. Everything after that is then development. So what he's got here is kind of that ba-da-da-da-dum is this again in yet another key. So this is what would be called a middle entry. It's in the development section. That's what you expect is more entries of the subject transposed differently, harmonized differently, broken up into little fragments. And that's exactly what's going on here. So this is, oops, not this. This is, to me, the start of the development section. This would count as a middle entry. Exactly that. And it's quite exact. Again, we go up to the 2 half notes, and then we have the dotted quarter eighth, dotted quarter eighth. So this is a middle entry. This is what defines the start of a development section, but then it's over. So the question is, you could either want this to be the start of your development section, and then you got to keep going. You got to go a lot more than that to feel like it's really going to be called a fugue. To me, though, this feels like an ending. So that feels ending-like, but you could either take that as an ending and insert some more development material before it, or you could treat that as the start of your development section. But I'd want to hear more. You want to hear like little fragments. And so when we look at Sam's fugue in a second, you'll see some of the things that he does. But some of the things that you saw me doing also of using little fragments. In fact, when we flip back to mine, you get to see that little, like here, bum, boom, ba-doom, bum, bum. Just that much. That's all I used. Bum ba da doo bum bum to the quarter note. Then it should have gone ba da da dum, and I didn't. I just wanted to use that fragment to say, hey, I still am playing that fugue there. And I do it again somewhere else. Well, here, ba 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 da ba bum, and then I do go somewhere else. But then again, I use a fragment of it again here. Bum ba da dum bum bum, right here. bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-da-dum, is essentially this line. Boom, ba-ba-dum, bum. Transposed a little bit, intervals altered. So using fragments of things to build up something, that's the meat of a fugue. The exposition is like, okay, I've set the stage now, but now comes the fun part where we develop those ideas. So you have the starter development section here. What needs to happen is more of that, and then playing with some of these things. Ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum. All sorts of things where you just play with that little fragment. Or ba-da-da-da-da, fragment, just take this little fragment and play with it. Or maybe take that ba-da-da-da-dum and do augmentation with it. Bum, 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 bum. And have that kind of thing going on as part of the counterpoint. You play with all of those things. A place where you use stretto, where you start the phrase here, and then you let the next entrance of it come in just one measure later instead of waiting for it to finish. The nice thing, stretto is hard to do normally because it's like almost miraculous if the intervals all work out to spell chords and it sounds good harmonically. But in this type of language here, you're not dealing with ordinary triads and chords, so you could totally just take this exact phrase, copy it right to here. I'm going to put it in the cello, move it down an octave, and while I'm at it, just for grins, take it down a half step just to guarantee that it doesn't relate to what was there before. It's pretty dissonant, right? Well, then you play with the intervals and play with the transposition and see if one of them makes you any happier. And maybe none of them make you completely happy, and maybe none of them would have made Bach happy enough because the chords didn't line up right. But you won't have to have the chords line up perfectly to be happy with this, I think. If I just took it down another half a step, you might be happy. I don't know, whatever. That's for you to play with. But that idea of the stretto where you're bringing in something, it's not like you have to have stretto to have a fugue, because often, as I said, it's hard and sometimes it just doesn't work out harmonically. But you don't have that reason to not try it because it's going to be okay to have dissonance. There's been plenty of other dissonances. You've set a stage that says dissonance is okay in your world, so embrace it. So anyhow, that's my feedback there. So, what key name has 5 flats? B flat minor. Yes, absolutely. And that's where my theme music there that I wrote started off in B flat minor, actually, because I was taking this line from B flat major and I just wanted it to be B flat minor. So it was 5 flats. Okay, so now I'm going to open Sam's fugue and just take a look at that now. So yeah, again, if you finish that, William, we'll take another look at it later because it's kind of fun to look at these works in progress and follow them through. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah, I encourage you. I think, yeah, I mean, they have valid points. This isn't, your piece doesn't resemble traditional Baroque style harmonies, and it does have that thing going on where you're not using the viola to state the theme ever, and it's missing the development. So yeah, there's a lot of things about it that get in the way of being able to say, yes, I have written a complete fugue. But to me, there's a lot of good material here, a lot of good ideas that totally deserve being finished up and will totally deserve the name fugue, even if it's not a Baroque stylistically, harmonically, and also. Absolutely, William, I encourage you to keep working. All right, so here's Sam's piece, which now is much more in the traditional type of language. So I'm going to play this thing through. Okay, so Sam, this is the updated version. I saw your comment there. I did just download your updated version, so I think this should be it. Beautiful. You did a fantastic job on that, Sam. So, what I'm going to do here is I don't want to like, I'm aware that I just get so wrapped up in these things and I just go on and on and on. And I don't want to like, I want to give people good feedback, but I don't want to like, feel like make people feel compelled to like stay tuned for ridiculous amounts of time. What I want to do is focus on particular things that are noteworthy here, and in particular things that I think you can take to your own writing if people other than Sam, and in particular William, some of the things that I've talked about. So one question is, how many voices are in this fugue? Well, let's see, because I didn't count. I'm going to guess there's 3, and I'm going to guess that only because he's showing the rests here on that top staff, which is like where the third voice will be. And I never really saw more than 3 voices happen at a time. So yeah, it's a 3-voice fugue. Okay, that's I know that now. But so our first voice starts, doo, da, da, dum. The next voice, bum 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 bum. So it's been adjusted, right? This first note should have been a D if we were going to literally go up a fifth, right? G up a fifth is D. This would be what's called a real answer. What he has done is made this tonal adjustment, and that's a real common thing to do. You adjust a couple of the first notes so that even though you're up a fifth, even though we're suggesting something about the 5, we want it to feel like scale degree 5, but we still want to feel like we're in the original key. And so when the melody starts on scale degree 5, instead of transposing it up to scale degree 2, we cheat and we transpose it up to 1 so that it feels like we're still in the key of C minor. So that's a common technique, is if in the beginning of your subject you use scale degree 5, well then transpose that to scale degree 1. Take it up a fourth instead of a fifth. And then leave the rest of the piece. So leave the rest of it alone. And that's the only adjustment that he made as far as I know here. So other than the first note, all the other notes are exactly up a fifth. That kind of adjustment you make for tonal reasons. That's why it's called a tonal response. And you do that because now I get C against E flat, a nice C minor chord. I'm in C minor. It feels like I've stayed in C minor. If he had changed this to a D, then he would have had to change that E flat, first of all, also because it's probably not the sound he would have wanted, that dissonance there. But it would have kind of pulled us further away from the key of C minor, no matter what he changed that E flat to, and would have required some more thinking about, well, what do I want to do to stay in the key? So there's that going on, and now he has this the first voice, which is actually the middle voice, is doing some new material. Ba-da-boo, bum, bum. And then this figure is really kind of nice. It's do da bum. Then he this is this sort of bridge material here. Boo ba bum, boo ba dum, boo ba dum. Right? This is what's called a sequence. And that sequence is really just based a little bit on this shape that was part of the counter subject. But then he's like, hey, I kind of like that last little thing I just wrote. Let me do some more of that. Let me do some more of that. Leap up, step down, leap up, step down. Originally it was leap up, leap down, but it turned into leap up, step down, which is fine. And so now you have this figure that then, now let's take the same thing down a step. Now another step. And in doing that, I say it's going down a step, but within the measure, it's going around the circle of fifths, right? This is 2, 5 in the key of B flat. Then now we're on the B flat chord. So it started with C minor to F, and then it takes us to B flat. The wonderful thing about sequences is if you do it over a 2, 5, then the next sequence, you're going to want to start on 1, because that's what follows 2, 5 along the circle of fifths, and 1 is a step below 2. So sequences going down in steps are the most natural things in the world to write. If you write a sequence over 2, 5, it's going to want to resolve to a 1. It's going to be, therefore, a step. You're all positioned perfectly to be a step below where you just were. And then he's setting himself up for, he's, figured out where he is on the circle of fifths. Oh my gosh, I'm on an A kind of chord here, and I'm on a D chord. Okay, from that D chord I can get to G, and now I'm back to C minor, which is where he wanted to be, so that the final entrance could be back in the original key. And he is using that counter subject, which is good. You want to use that. The counter subject was this. Ba-da-da-da-dum. Bum. Sorry, I'm on the wrong key. Ba-do-do-dum. Bum. 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 Ba-da-da-dum. Bum. Bum. He's using that again here. Ba-da-da-bum. Bum. Bum. And as far as I know, it's a literal translation of it. So he's using that same counter subject against this subject, just transposed. Meanwhile, the other voice is doing some new material. Now, in this piece, there's not a lot of eighth notes, right? It's more of a steady quarter note pulse. So there's some eighth notes, but not a ton. So he's not going out of his way to throw eighth notes everywhere throughout this. I talk about distributing the motion throughout the voices. Here, I would say it's a consistent quarter note rhythm. So anytime one voice has, or in this case, two voices have a half note, someone else fills in the missing beat. So every beat has something happen, because in this kind of music we don't have drummers and bass players laying down grooves. The any notion of a steady beat is going to come from how the instruments, how the voices of the fugue themselves establish a beat. And so anytime one is going to have a long note, someone else had better keep the pulse going, because you don't have a drummer to do it for you. So that's part of why this technique, and that's why in non-fugue, in non-contrapuntal textures, you see all this dee 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 dee. You see these like repeating arpeggio patterns to achieve the same purpose of keeping a steady pulse happening. But when you're writing counterpoint, it's more a matter of distributing the motion between voices. So anyhow, he has another lovely. He likes sequences as much as I do, I would say. Right? So there's another sequence, and this one is going up in steps instead of down in steps. So I mentioned anytime you have 2-5, a sequence over a 2-5, it's going to naturally lead you to the next one a step below. If you work out what's going on harmonically with this one, it's this chromatic ascent. So it's the idea that I have this chord in first inversion, then moving to a chord in root position here. But then if I then rehear that note as the third, so this is the third, this is a C minor chord, and that's our third, and it goes up to the root of the next chord, again following the circle of fifths. But again, I'm pointing to my ear, not because I've got something in it, because I'm hearing now that same F that was the root of this F minor chord. I am now rehearing it as the third of this D chord. And that lets me then take it up to G. And then the same thing again. This G is the root of a G minor chord. And then I rehear it as the third of this E flat chord. And that brings me up again. So that's another typical type of sequencing technique. By hearing a note at first as the root of one chord, but then hearing it as the third of another chord, that's going to pull you up. So that sequencing will keep happening this way, where you're going up in steps there. So then the sequence can keep going up in steps. I can't say that I've ever literally thought that through before. It was seeing it here and knowing that I was going to talk about it that I said, oh, I better find out how to do this. And then it came to me that that's what's happening. It's this rehearing of chords as a root. No, now it's first inversion. And then that is what enables the sequence to go up. There's probably other patterns that achieve that same thing. So anyhow, he's got a lot of sequences. Now again, I see, ba-da-do-da-dum-bum. I see again that counter subject here. Boo-dum-bum-bum-bum. right? That's the counter subject. And here's that subject. Do, ba, da, 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 dum. And so we get to see the subject, we get to see the counter subject, and again I get to see ba da 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 da. I'm actually recognizing the counter subject. It's in some ways more recognizable to me than the subject itself is, because the subject is so quarter note focused, it's harder to maybe recognize, and that's fine. But when that happens, I will hopefully notice it. But ba da 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 dum jumps out at me, and so in this case, it's the counter subject that is jumping out at me some more than the subject. But I see the counter subject there. Now another lovely ascending sequence. And here, there wasn't that thing going on of rehearing a bass note as a root versus a thing. It was just, well, here's the root, and then go down a third to root, root, and then again down a third. So you can follow that pattern. That's like 5 to 1, and then 6 to 2, or however you want to think of it. 1 to 4, and then 2 to 5, and then 3 to 6. It's going up a fourth, then down a third, up a fourth, down a third. That pattern is basically the same harmonic pattern, just without inversions, right? If I'd made that D be an F, we'd have the same thing we had before. So in fact, if I had taken all of these and just moved all of these roots up to thirds, so I'm not saying that's better. It's not better, in fact, because the voice leading wouldn't have worked out as well. But it's the same basic idea, and that's where that, if I talk about rehearing a note as a root or a third, what I'm really talking about is the root has moved by third, and so here is just being that much more explicit. Yeah, the root went down a third. Now I can definitely see, here comes my subject again. In the original key, but it's harmonized now major, right, which is really nice. And that's a typical fugue thing also. If you have a piece that was originally, you heard it in a minor key, somewhere in your middle entries, I want to hear that same piece major, and we get it here. But that time it goes to minor within a measure. This one, well, I guess this one did too, actually. Is that the same one? Yeah, it is. No, because it was in thirds. Where's my one in thirds? Here's the one in thirds. So that one didn't have the motion of minor in the middle of it. That stayed major. Beautiful. It's a great thing to do. So and then here again I see the ba da 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 dum. I see the counter subject here, and then it starts another sequence. So there, ba da da dum. It's just a fragment of the counter subject that is then taken in a sequence, and this time it's a descending sequence. So because the top note was E flat, now the top note is D. But it's taking that fragment, the most recognizable of melodic material to me in the whole piece, then he's sequencing here, which you better do. If you're going to write something that noteworthy, please reuse it, and he does. And then here, you get a figure that's rhythmically like it, but it's not completing the sequence. At some point, the sequences are a little addictive, so you use them, but you don't overuse them, and so you're in danger of doing that. And so it's good that you broke out of it here. And now we're back to the original key, and we have a final statement of the subject and the counter subject here, and then ending with this pedal point, right? So this C being held out in the bass while we do other funny stuff on top of it. And then finally ending with an actual major chord. So the only thing I would say about this is that's a piano. I know that those C's are going to die before I get to the end, especially MuseScore's playback. So I would actually recommend restating the pedal point. you could probably do it a little more artfully than just whole notes like that. But that's the only thing that I would say from a practical perspective. To play this on the piano at that tempo, the C won't be audible by the end. So, maybe keep the first tie but lose the second one, or throw in a little grace note to make it more interesting. There's any number of things you can do to restate that C so we keep hearing it. On organ, though, then you play that note with the pedal, and it would stay as long as your foot stays on that pedal. So beautiful job, Sam, and thanks for submitting it. So we've been talking a lot about counterpoint, a lot about fugues, and I'm not totally done. I mentioned that I'm teaching a counterpoint course at the university now, and I'm developing a counterpoint course for my online school. So please go visit my site, and I'm bad at reminding people that that's a thing, but it is a thing. It's a thing I spend a lot of time working on, and I think I do a pretty good job. So go visit my site, check out the courses that are there. There is a new counterpoint course that I'm currently working on. I've uploaded 3 lessons so far, and they're even just rough drafts. But within the next couple months, I'll have a fully completed counterpoint course in conjunction with what I'm teaching at the university, which is why I'm so focused on it right now. But it's not by any means my main focus in life. It is something I like a lot, though. So I'm going to keep coming back to counterpoint over this next month or two. But I'm going to go other places. So hopefully next week I'll have something completely different to talk about. But also I do want to come back and check out one more, hopefully one more version of Williams Fugue when it gets completed. So your question here, is the development section just experimenting? Yeah, that's it. Does it have guidelines? Well, everything you heard me saying is a guideline, but guideline means guideline. It doesn't mean recipe. It doesn't mean exact recipe. But this idea that you're going to take fragments of a melody and sequence them, yeah, that's a thing. The fact that you heard me in my version do that augmentation, and you saw me talk about doing that with yours, where I took a fragment of it and doubled all the note values. In this case, it could have actually been interesting to have them. That's called diminution. Diminution. God, that's so hard for me to say. Because instead of quarter, 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 eighth, eighth, quarter, it could have gone eighth, 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 16th, 16th, eighth, right? Bum, 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 bum. That could have been really interesting to hear that happen somewhere. But yeah, you want to use those things. You want to try to see if you can make a stretto happen where you have one entrance come in before a first one has finished. Bring in these entrances in different keys, harmonize them differently, use fragments of them, play around with them. That's the thing. And if you go back and watch the demonstrations that I did over the last couple of weeks, the one where we looked at Dean's fugue, where we had everything all nice and color coded, and look at that Bach fugue that I did a couple of weeks ago, the B flat major one, where I showed everything going on in that one. Everything that you see me talking about, these are your ingredients, but we want you to use those ingredients. If I throw you, so okay, I live in Colorado. I have Southwestern cuisine on the mind all the time. If I put down a bunch of cilantro, and I put down a bunch of cumin, and I put down some chili peppers and some tomatoes and some onions and some pinto beans and some tortillas, and then I also put down some pasta, and I put down some pesto. If you take those ingredients and you just ignore the first 7 I mentioned, and you just serve yourself a bowl of pasta with pesto, that's not Southwest cuisine, right? You ignored way too many of the ingredients. On the other hand, if you took that pasta and maybe you threw away the pesto, you didn't use the pesto, but you did use with that pasta the cilantro and the cumin and the tomatoes and tomatillos. So let's get some tomatillos. If you use all these other Southwestern ingredients and you happen to have some pasta in there with it, yeah, Southwestern inspired pasta. I would totally buy that. But if you don't use any of those Southwestern typical ingredients, you're going to have a hard time calling it Southwestern. So similarly with a fugue, there's all these ingredients you have, stretto, sequencing, all these different things that you can play with. Use them. Don't have to use every single one of them in every single fugue, but by gosh, you got to use a few of them, or it's not going to be recognizable as a fugue. So that's my best answer for you there. All right, so you can ignore the cilantro if you want. Yeah, I know. I guess it's a hereditary thing. Some people just don't process it the same way as others. So I hope everyone who's stuck with us this far has has enjoyed it. When I say this far, I mean this is as far as it is, because we are going to come to a close now. So I'm just going to play out my theme song and take my leave of you while I talk over it a little bit. So this is what I do every week. I just have a lot of fun just looking at music. It helps me to think about music. It helps me to take the music I'm working on and show you all what I'm working on and take the music that you do in response to it. So write something different. Someone write some like totally unrelated thing, and that'll set our direction for what we might talk about next week. Next week, if I see that someone submits, um, I will happily take that as an indicator of what our direction should be for the next week or two, and see what else we can do. So let's get out there, make some music, guys, gals. See you later. See you next time. Bye.